Welcome to the Pod of Asclepius, your fortnightly healthcare technology podcast for the technical crowd, sponsored by the American Statistical Association and the Institution of Engineering and Technology. We're bringing the technical experts of engineering, entrepreneurship, data science, and regulation straight to your earbuds. No fluff, no sale pitches, just important technical ideas described well to keep you up to date, all in the time it takes to get to work. And here's your host, Glenn Wright Colopy.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our episode introducing the Medical Device and Diagnostics section of the American Statistical Association. This is part 2 of our episode with Martin Ho from the FDA and later Greg Maislin from the University of Pennsylvania. In the first part of the episode, what we talked about were the variety of activities that the MDD section has, particularly for the benefit of its youngest members to learn and grow as statisticians. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about a topic that has been getting a lot of traction and interest within our field.
So while I have you on here, because I very much like your quote about everyone's a Bayesian.
Bayesian sometimes. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, everyone's a Bayesian until you get too many integrals, and then you become the more frequentist. And then we curse the person who can think in
more integrals than us.
But the issue of Bayesian adaptive trials, because we know that a lot of work has been done in Bayesian adaptive trials, but when you're mentioning other things like latent variables and latent variable analysis, that those are also heavily used in Bayesian statistics. What are the variety of methods that, for example, the CDRH was looking at and what you're currently looking at in Bayesian methods? So just like, what is the broad scope of these Bayesian methods that are used beyond just Bayesian adaptive trials?
It's a very good question. I think, of course, the Bayesian framework is also actively used within the diagnostic space. And I would say that especially for the new digital health technologies, they are literally everyone is a Bayesian. Because it seems like the new generation of the biomedical engineers, they really get the right idea about how to capture the uncertainty and make the data and make the algorithms being able to be adaptive and learning from the past experience and keeps on improving the performance of the algorithms. So therefore, they have zero problem when we're talking about using a Bayesian approach. And rather, it would be rather difficult to explain to them the traditional frequentist type of approach when it comes to the wearable devices such as, Fitbit or Apple Watch and whatnot. So I think it seems like at the wearable device space, I think Bayesian is getting a very upper hand. So this is yet another areas that, Bayesian statistics have been very, very active. And the third space that I would like to argue is the benefit risk assessment space, which I also was lucky to be, taking part in some of the international effort to try to have a better understanding about how to do that. So the gist of that is traditionally the role of a statistician is we are doing our best to define or to develop a study endpoint that can provide the highest signal to noise ratio. And then afterwards, we design a study so that we can isolate the potential confounding factors and the biases. And at the same time, we also try to make the measurement even more precise. But despite all these blood, sweats, and sleepless hours, the end result is just a point estimate with the uncertainty around them. So being a statistician, I would argue that in order to make a decision based on this estimate, statisticians should definitely play a role in working with our clinician colleagues to make a better or more consistent, transparent decisions. For example, for regulatory decisions or for other type of decisions. In fact, I think in most of corporate America environments, they've already quite used to using the decision science method to make certain type of decision, for example, the go and no-go investment and funding for their drugs or for their programs. Therefore, I think Bayesian obviously is built for this type of assessment as well, because the Bayesian not only allow us to think about, to formalize the learning process of the ongoing experiment, but more important, it can also systematically incorporate the weight or the loss function, if you will, across the outcomes, across the sample space, so that it can greatly help us to put our challenging questions in a framework that is tractable As you said, I know people may not like those integral as the numbers are growing, but it doesn't matter as long as it's the machine who are doing it. Even though we need to be, of course, careful about how to construct the questions to make it more computational feasible. But at the same time, it's always nice to put a problem into, I would say, a formula, or not formula, but rather a mathematical format, so that people would know what they are talking about, instead of just having people thinking about all these different factors that some may be important than the others, but we don't know by how much. It would be very important for us to provide some tools that can help inform a decision if the decision is very difficult to make using the traditional way of weighting the benefits and risks.
Well, as someone who does nearly strictly Bayesian analysis on time series from wearables, well, with the volume of data that's coming through, not want, anything other than some type of Bayesian regularization to help
Yes.
inform those, and also just to basically to use the Bayesian approaches in order to just encode what we know about these real systems, the real physiology that's behind them, the real digital processing and the actual digital signal and the device noise effects. We want Bayesian methods to be encoding those types of things as opposed to pretending that they don't exist or that we have enough data, just to bleed it out in the first place.
Exactly.
And especially for when it comes to point estimates and having to make go no go decisions. Personally, I very much like the intuition behind saying, we are uncertain about our underlying assumptions. And therefore, by providing a distribution around them, we are sort of encoding that uncertainty, and then we can see the range of outcomes that sort of are derived from that uncertainty. But other people also criticize these priors as being subjectively defined. For example, it's fairly rare that we have truly good prior information that really means that we have these data defined priors. It's more that these priors are fairly subjective in our selection, and people criticize Bayesian methods because of that. But again, the counter argument to that, of course, is that at least Bayesians are putting out their subjective assumptions to the forefront, where frequentists sort of tuck them behind the curtain. What is your impression on having outright subjective priors that are apparent versus sort of these more hidden assumptions of frequentist methods? How do you respond to the subjectivity issue with Bayesianism?
Excellent questions. To me, just like not all clinical trials evidence are created equal, not all subjective information created equal. In the sense that it's very different if a subjective comment are coming from a layperson who doesn't know a thing about neurological devices versus an opinion coming from someone who are experts in that space. And what's the difference between the well-informed person and the not so informed person is that the well-informed person, they can provide a more meaningful or more reliable prior, so to speak, the subjective assessment of a certain question is because the information that had been accumulated in his mind, and there was an ongoing learning process that tried to incorporate all this information in a very subtle, human way to build this information to reach the point that is being summarized in a subjective distribution that an expert is giving today. So I think when people are saying certain Bayesian methods, is the prior is too subjective, I would say it depends on who is giving the prior. And at the same time, if a person who is a layperson doesn't know a thing and meanwhile give us a higher skilled prior distribution, then I think I would be able to judge whether that is a meaningful prior from my perspective to evaluate the analysis result. If I got to see an expert prior and being plugged into the analysis, then I can also make my own judgment to see whether the result is plausible. Perhaps the most easiest example or the most quoted or cited example that people use is that in frequentist approach, I mean the best estimate is always coming from the experiment that we have in hand. So in other words, this is what it is. But in a medical context, if very experienced doctors seeing a trial or perhaps a measurement coming from a patient, that person can make a judgment based on their prior or subjective assessment right away to determine whether it is likely to be an outlier or just basically a laboratory mistake. But I mean, without this pretext or without a whole bunch of data being provided beforehand for frequentist approach, they simply cannot make that judgment because the latest number that's coming from the lab without the previous data points, the frequentist has to accept that as the estimate. So therefore, I think from my perspective, even though Bayesian approach, the result is driven by the subjective prior, but at the same time, I would say that for those who know the information or the subject matter, their opinion or their assessment of certain things should be biased because they know what is right and what is wrong and what is likely and what is not. So just like when we are asking a physician who has decades of experience, their opinions tends to be very, very sharp or acute, versus the other people, they may have a much more non-informative prior. But again, not only that, the subjective prior is important, but more importantly, we provide a decision maker, which is the user of the analysis result, is to assess, how sensitive the study result or the analysis conclusion is, depending on different type of subjective prior being plugged into the analysis. For that, I mean, frequentist approach simply doesn't provide such mechanism for us to make that kind of assessment.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you've highlighted that I really think is important is that when you have these people with, years of experience where they've looked at this type of data again and again and again over long courses, and they know what you're trying to derive from your statistical or your predictive model, they know what the inputs look like, they know what the outputs look like. And the Bayesian framework provides them, for example, not just with a way to regularize their model, but actually sort of decide how the priorities of different parameters stack up. So how the strength of these, relative comparators, not just to regularize one parameter in your model, but how these multiple parameters should essentially be comparing to each other. And it's really nice to have a coherent principled framework, i.e. Bayesianism, that allows us to sort of impute those priorities in the model because, the actual priorities in the model might be very different from what would just happen if you just glopped all the data down onto an uninformed model and just saw what happened, especially when you bring into things like experimental design and the observation process where, these things don't really care about your model. They just care about sort of the process that generates that one specific type of data. And it might not actually represent the true underlying data generating process.
Yes, I completely agree.
We've talked quite a bit about digital health. Did you want to talk at all about the digital health initiatives for the medical device section?
Oh, yes. So before I joined the Center for Biologics, I was the leader of developing the real-world performance component of the digital health initiative at Center for Devices. And I think this is a very groundbreaking paradigm from Center for Devices. The difference between wearable devices from the traditional medical devices are at least two ways. The first way is that the wearable devices, at this existing range of products, they're relatively lower risk than the other more traditional devices such as heart valve or deep brain stimulations or pacemakers. So therefore, the risk aspect of these devices is relatively low. And the second aspect of these type of digital health devices are their connectivity and their real-time responsiveness. Compared to the traditional medical devices, they're relatively unconnected, and the data points tend to be much less frequent. So therefore, based on those two characteristics, I mean, wearable devices are actually a perfect area where the Center for Devices can practice one of its paradigm of thinking, which is bring about products that has relatively low risk, but at the same time, if they can detect some suboptimality or some things that they need to fix, they can simply send a package through internet to their wearable devices to correct their algorithms. And at the same time, they also can collect the real-time response from the users or the patients back to the data center every day so that they can have an almost close to real-time assessment of not only if there is any bad adverse events, but also they can even know how many people have been turned the device on, how many patients have wear them, and for how long, and when, and under what circumstances. So therefore, it provides almost like a close to perfect surveillance, scenario from a device's perspective. versus the traditional medical devices such as pacemakers or heart valves. Something has to go really wrong and the person go to hospitals and they have suspicions about the malfunction of certain devices, and then they have to TL all this, going through a relatively long, investigations and conclude and trying to figure out what's the reason of, or to determine whether the device was malfunction as a cause of an adverse event. So therefore, the idea of the initiative is that for companies who are at the cutting edge of these wearable devices, they know what they are doing. In fact, they have a lot more information about, how the device works and the performance of their algorithms. And they also have much more resources when it comes to monitoring the performance of their devices. So therefore, in order to avoid stifling the innovations, rather, the Center for Devices want to be a partner and collaborator to move this area forward by, first, for those who have maintained a very good, being a very good manufacturer and designer, they would be recognized for their good practices within a company. And then for those companies, if the conditions are satisfied and if their quality of the company, not only the products, but the company, if the company is good, then this company could be recognized and certified. And afterwards, the devices that are manufactured or designed by these certified companies can go directly to market. In exchange for that freedom, they need to provide a more real-time assessment from the Center for Devices so that when things go wrong, FDA would receive a much more timely update about these errors or these signals, and they can collaboratively working with these certified companies or organizations to develop a fix and seeing those fixes deliver back to the devices through the internet. So this is a dream of the Center Director of Devices, Jeff Shuren, and the Digital Health Unit Division Director, Akul Patel. And so they believe that by doing this, by using this approach, that would really reduce the amount of time that a device, a wearable device that will require to submit the devices to the FDA through the traditional network, which can take a month easily for it to be reviewed and then to be cleared. In this new approach, you can see that since the review is based on the company, not the product, so that would make the proposition much more feasible. And at the same time, there will be a feedback loop about the performance of not only their products, but also the company itself in its response to some safety signals within the product. And at the end of the day, the FDA will work with them and calibrate the level of approval or clearance that the company can still process. So in other words, it will be an ongoing process between the FDA and the certified company rather than the submission-based relationship. The new digital health initiative will be an ongoing collaboration.
Well, that is an absolute waterfall of information, especially of just really cool ideas. And these are very challenging problems, but they are extremely practical and they're extremely grounded in good clinical science. In fact, we'll probably need to have another few episodes just to cover all the varieties of information there is in that. But yeah, there are many things to address in this. But, just even one of those is the fact that, as we were talking about before, we don't really know what the effectiveness is for many things given different clinical scenarios and different clinical protocols. And so, as we know, when a device, for example, is being approved to begin with, if it's only tested on a healthy set of patients or a very specified set of unhealthy patients, we don't really know how that changes the moment we change the clinical indication or how it works on subsets of patients or then different populations entirely. So it seems like this could be a very useful framework to actually very quickly evaluate new efficacies, allow people to innovate, not essentially punishing them for innovation. You don't want to basically say, yeah, you can innovate, but you're going to have to wait. It's going to create a 6-month turnaround or a year-long turnaround.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that adding on to what you just said is, again, is another hit on the head of the nail, is that the reasons why the Center for Device want to do this program is because to encourage the company to improve and upgrade itself. rather than punishing them for being responsive and being innovative. And that is exactly the idea that Dr. Stewart is so eager to set it up. And I think I also wanted to say that while the clinical trial space, people are, very thinking about the effective problems a lot, but we are not the only one. Just imagine that if you are in a highly competitive marketplace, if I were some, let's say Apple or Samsung, I want to make my product stand out. I would really careful about how I can measure in some way the performance of my product compared to my competitors in real life. And then after collecting this information, they have to figure out a way to implement those improvements in a feasible manner. And this is exactly the industry know-how that the FDA Center for Devices and especially digital health team, me included, learned a lot when we were conducting quite a bit of site visits to all these outstanding digital health vendors to see how they have, in a marketplace context, to collect those what they call performance, but from our perspective, is almost like a corresponding part as effectiveness when the product reach in the user's hands, and they constantly collect those information, measure their performance, and improve their products. So such a very, very exciting to see, in marketplace, they are also doing more or less the same thing.
Not to create another tangential branch, but what you said did remind me of something, going from research into industry and starting to go from, simply worrying about creating and automating these Bayesian time series models for prediction and patient deterioration detection, but then actually having to create the entire AI system around it, all the support systems and the algorithms that curate the data and pipeline the data and check that your assumptions haven't been violated, and then produce an output that is viewable by a person. As you might know, there was a NIPS paper a few years ago that talks about the technical debt of machine learning systems, where it talks about all the things that need to go into supporting a machine learning system so that it's functioning and working at all times. And I couldn't help but wonder, doing some of this work for my own purposes, it's like, well, this is really tough, and it's tough for the Googles and the Apples to accomplish. And just curious, it's like, well, how's the FDA going to know what to do, and how are they going to do this? And it's really exciting to hear that essentially you guys are getting those pipelines, so you aren't needing to bring that skill set in-house. You're simply listening to that skill set that's already out there in industry who are working on the cutting edge.
Yes. Again, it's you really are capturing the essence of the spirit of the program, is the recognition of the expertise and the depth of subject matter experts inside the industry, versus the FDA. And we are very honestly come forth as someone who are trying to learn from the industry in terms of these algorithms and how to make it work and how to make them robust. So I think, again, is the perfect insight that just in the existing framework and the user fee funding scheme, it's impossible for the FDA to have the depth of knowledge of these wide range of products comparable to Google, Apple, or the other industries who have their niche of knowledge regarding their products. So we are focusing rather on the outcome rather than the algorithm itself. So therefore, yes, I think that's exactly the idea.
Well, I think we've covered a huge amount today, and I think it's great to have this conversation because it, to be blunt, shows how awesome the Medical Device and Diagnostics section is. The section is giving you access to people like Martin and Greg and real innovative experts both from industry and in regulatory and in academia, showing that we aren't just talking about old, dusty statistical issues. We're actually really trying to get to the meat of the most pressing, technologically advanced issues that there are today. So
I hope that anyone who's listening who finds this interesting can see that there's a huge value in being involved in the Medical Device and Diagnostics section. So come on in, the water is warm.
And you can definitely get a lot by being involved. And one more activity is the Medical Device and Diagnostics Idea Exchange, which Greg is kindly going to be covering in the next podcast episode with us. So definitely come back and listen to that if the time comes. But until then, Martin, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Pod of Asclepius. We hope you enjoyed it and will tune in for our next episode. If you're watching from YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. You can also follow us on our other social media channels, including LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram. Have a great story or presentation that's ready for prime time? Or know someone who does? Drop Glenn an email because he'd be happy to hear from you. We would like to thank our sponsors from the American Statistical Association section on Statistical Learning and Data Science, section on Medical Devices and Diagnostics, and North Carolina chapter, as well as the Institution of Engineering and Technology. The views expressed on the show are those of the speaker and not their employers, our sponsors, or anyone else not saying the word.